So yeah, so we have these two images, and remember last time we talked about destructive versus non-destructive editing. So we don't want to destroy the pixels in the image if we don't have to. So what we want to do is mask out the part that we want. So last time we looked at a couple different tools. There's a new tool in Adobe. It's actually new to me, which we can take a look at real quick, which is the object selection tool. And this is supposed to find an object. So you can see it does a pretty good job with the bird, but it doesn't work with the shadow because there's not enough, the detail in the shadow looks too much like the rest of the scene. So this is a quick way to start the mask. And we can see it's not perfect, so we're going to have to edit it a little bit, but this gets us a little bit closer. And so what I'm going to do is actually mask the bird and the shadow separately so that I can add different effects to them. And so one way I can do that, I'm going to clear this selection and I'm going to duplicate this layer. So I have two copies of it. I could also name my layers if I want to make things a little bit easier to see. Right now I have these big long layer names, but if I double click on the name, I can call this like background, although I already have a background layer. So let's call this, this is like my sunset image. And let's call this bird, and this will be bird shadow. So we can name our different layers to make it a little bit easy to see what layer, what's on what. So I'm going to turn off the shadow for now. So I'm going to turn off that eyeball, and I'm going to select my bird again. And so I've got my selection. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can see it's pretty accurate. There's a little bit of stuff down here that I'm going to want to edit. So if I'm happy enough with that, I can stick with this. And I'm going to click on the mask button, which is down here in my layers panel. You might have your layers panel all the way on the left, but you should still see these buttons down at the bottom. So I'm going to click mask. And oh, I had the wrong layer selected, so I'm going to go to my bird layer and click mask again. And there we go. So we have to make a couple edits here. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. And look, so there's this shadow part that I want to remove. I also, when I look at the edge of the bird, I'm going to pick the move tool for a second so I don't keep highlighting it. You can see there's this very faint white outline on the bird. And I might want to get rid of that if I want it to be a little more blended in with the background. So we're going to look at how to do both of those right now. Any questions so far? So I use the quick select tool, which is should be, if you have the default window, you should be able to see it here. If you have like the wand or the quick selection tool, you may need to hold down and then you'll see all the options. Actually, I use the object select tool and then I just click on the object that I want. So it may not work if the image you have on top doesn't have enough contrast. But I'm going to go over how to do that with the shadow. So if it didn't work, if you couldn't get an object very cleanly, that's okay. We're going to do it again with the shadow. Okay, so we want to get rid of this shadow part down here. And so once I create the mask, I can't, I'm going to zoom in on this. I can't use the selection tool anymore to change the mask, but I can edit the mask. Okay, so what I want to do now is I'm going to use my brush and I'm going to go over to channels, and you can see in my channels section, I have the image divided into a few different sections. For some reason, it won't let me click on this. Oh, okay, so I have the red, green, blue, and then my mask. If I turn off everything, you can see the mask is just an image where every pixel is either black or white. If the pixel is white, then the original image shows through. If the pixel is black, then the original image is transparent. So what I'm really editing is just a black and white silhouette of what I want to see. If I turn on all my layers, it makes it red. Okay, so it's not really red, but it makes it red so that it's easier for me to see it on top of the rest of my image. So if I want to edit this mask, I can take my brush, and if I add to the red, it adds to the mask. Okay, so I'm adding to the mask here. And if I remove the red, it removes the mask. So if I wanted to remove some, I could grab my eraser. And my eraser is kind of a big, weird thing. So let's just get a regular brush. So I'm just going to use the properties up here. And I could erase parts of my mask. Although for some reason, oh, it switched me back to the brush for some reason. Okay, but I don't really want to do that. I just want to brush out the shadow parts of the image. So this is good for little details. If you have a ton of stuff, you might not want to do it this way because it's going to be a little tedious. But I'm just going to take out these little shadows under the feet of the bird. And, you know, you can, it's up to you how much detail you want here. It doesn't have to be perfect, but, you know, if you want to make it perfect, you can spend more time on this. So I'm just going to add in the rest of this mask. If I want to get really in there, there's this like white little section right here. I can make my brush really small and make it like 2 pixels. And I can fill in the mask right there. So it's up to you how much detail you want to put in. Doesn't have to be perfect. So now I'm going to zoom back out. I'm going to hit Command 0. And that looks pretty good. Let's go back to the layers and turn off the mask. So let's go back to the layers. Okay, it does look a little bit off. There's something, okay, so I think this part is actually part of the shadow. So let's go back and turn this back on. And I'm gonna take my brush again and just take this part out. Okay, so again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I just wanna, you know, make it look decent. So that's how I can edit my mask. I can actually edit my mask without the red on if I really want to. Like I can go to the layers, and if I select the mask in my layer and I use the brush, it'll add to my mask as well. So I can go in here and you can see I'm adding to the mask, or I can, oops, why is my eraser so weird? How did I, just get a regular brush and just erase that part. So I don't actually need the red part to edit my mask, but it makes it a lot easier. So that's how I can kind of clean up and refine the mask. Any questions on that? Okay, cool. So another thing I can do with my mask is I can edit the outline a little bit. So there's a few different things that I can do here. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So you can see there's this like white outline on the edge of the bird. And that's because the mask is hugging the side of the bird, but it's letting a little bit of color through. And if I don't want that to happen, I can right click on my mask and I can go to mask options. Oh wait, no, let's see. Go to selected mask. Okay, there we go. So I want the transparency to be all the way up. I don't know why this is down. But I can change the transparency, so I don't have to mask everything out. I could just, you know, do 50% or something like that. You can probably see all of this menu, but again, since I'm on the projector, my resolution is really low. So the part that I was missing was that for some reason this transparency was way down. So I want my transparency all the way up, but then I can go down here to the global refinements, and this is where I can get rid of that white edge. So a couple things I can do, I can change the feather value. So that actually spreads out how much of that color kind of bleeds through. I can change the smooth value, which changes the angle between the parts of the mask. I can change the contrast, which makes that edge harder, so it makes it more pixelated. And then I can also shift the edge. So if I shift the edge in, I'm going to get rid of a little bit of that stuff. And if I shift it out, I'm going to add to it. So I'm going to shift the edge in, but then I want to, well, let's shift the edge, not quite that much. And then we can feather just a little bit so it's not so pixelated. So you can play around with this. It doesn't really matter. It's an aesthetic choice. You know, if you like that little white outline, or maybe your image doesn't have it, you can play with that and get different qualities there. So you can see the edge shrinking, growing, and then the feather adding or subtracting. So I just want a tiny little bit of feather and just shift the edge just a little bit. So I can click OK. I can always go back and change this if I want to. As long as I don't rasterize these pixels, I can go back and change my mask. Okay, so we've got our bird. Let's work on the shadow next. Any questions? So let's mask the shadow, and then we'll move on to some other stuff. So I'm going to get my bird shadow here. I'm going to lock this bird layer so I don't accidentally edit that. So now I'm not worried about the bird anymore. What I want to do is mask the shadow. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in on the shadow a bit. So if I try to quick object the shadow, it doesn't really work. And the reason for that is because the shadow looks like the background, right? Like we can kind of see this line here, but I don't think the computer can tell the difference between this area and this area because they have similar amounts of like little speckles and details because they're both part of that sidewalk. So that's when we can use a different tool to select it ourselves. So we can hold down on the object select tool. And so the old way to do it was the magic wand tool where you would just like click on an area. And that's pretty good. If I hold shift and click on another area, it's going to add to that. And this is actually doing pretty well. So I might be fine with this. I can just get that last little speckle. Although we can edit that in later if we want to. So that's one way to do it. There's a couple other like speckles that it's selected over here. We can also, so I'm going to deselect, and then I can also use the quick selection tool, which is how I can kind of draw on stuff. And then this is the one where if I hold shift, I can add to the selection. And if I hold option or alt, I can remove parts of the selection. So this one is a little bit better than the magic wand tool. And of course, I can refine my mask a little bit if I want to. So I didn't want that part. Let's get rid of that. Okay. So that's good enough for my shadow. For now, I'm going to click on the mask. And then there we get the shadow. But it looks kind of weird, right? Like it looks really flat. And that's because the shadow isn't opaque. Oh, hey, Jonah. Let me just actually. Yeah, no, it's okay actually. So we're gonna pause here for a second. Jana is here. She has an announcement for NIPERG, so I'm gonna stop the